Well, great. I think we're being joined by our attendees now. So I want to say welcome as we have more folks coming in here. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Emily Hovermail. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Humane Rescue Alliance. We are so thrilled to be offering this community conversation and partnership with the Humane Society SPCA of Prince George's County to once again kind of restart these conversations, to talk with you all, the advocates, and get things going again to build back on addressing the breed ban, the Pitbull breed ban in Prince George's County. So we're very excited to have this first in what will not certainly be the last of actions around this to again get this back into the forefront for 2021. And I think many people probably saw the news out of Denver this election, where overwhelmingly the city residents voted 65% in favor of repealing that breed ban. So again, Prince George's County is making itself very much singular in continuing to hold on to this cruel, ineffective, and costly policy that ultimately does not work to save lives or increase public safety. So with that, I want to again welcome you all. Thank you for attending. And I want to introduce you to the panelists that we have here today, and then we'll kick it over to them for what's sure to be a very interesting conversation. First, we have Tony Thompson, who is a resident of Prince George's County for 40 years, should enunciate that. It's a big difference. And a member of the board of the SPCA Humane Society of Prince George's County, which is an all-volunteer organization dedicated to the protection of animals in Prince George's County. We also have Andy George, who is a resident of the county and who had her life disrupted by the ban on Pitbull type dogs. She's going to talk a lot more about that. Dan Duramo is the Director of Field Services for the Humane Rescue Alliance. He's been with HRA for over 10 years and is responsible for overseeing all of our bite investigations and cases involving recommendations for dangerous and potentially dangerous determinations. And he is a proud resident and homeowner in Prince George's County as well. And then Scott Cecil is a city council member in Mount Rainier. He's spent the past decade as an advocate for criminal justice reform and harm reduction, which is based in racial and economic justice. And he recently led the charge on the Mount Rainier City Council to pass a resolution deprioritizing enforcement of the county breed ban. So obviously a great diversity in folks here. Very excited to hear everyone's perspective and what everyone has to say. And I'll start it off with Tony Thompson. I want to hear from Tony to talk a little bit about where we got here, a little background on where we are now and how we got here in terms of the breed ban in Prince George's County.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone. I am going to give you a little background on the breed-specific ban as it affects Prince George's County, Maryland. The breed ban became a law in February of 1997. And in 2003, the county council, they asked for the formation of a look into the Pitbull ban as it stands. And the commission that they formed found that not only was the Pitbull ban very costly, they spent $250,000 in managing the Pitbull ban, which is a lot of money that could be used for other things. And as you're aware, the Pitbull ban as it stands, it has a fine or even jail terms that are connected to the Pitbull ban for the owners. And the reason that they had the Pitbull ban was because they had gotten information that the Pitbull was unpredictable in nature, extraordinarily savage, and the physical capabilities of the dog was made them dangerous. And the science does not show this. And one of the things that other jurisdictions in this country and also in this state have been finding is that this is not adherent to pit bulls. Dogs are they're animals, and dogs can be, if trained or if maltreated, they can be vicious. Any dog can be. Unfortunately, I just had a situation where one of my beloved pets was killed by a dog, a chow. And there's no chow ban, but this dog was unfortunately unattended by its owner and came into my yard and killed my cat. There's no, but the Dangerous Dog Act, let me also go that Prince George's County does have a law that protects or deals with dogs that are dangerous, dogs that are vicious, and it deals with the owners for not controlling those animals. So public safety is not improved by the pit bull ban, and that's what the commission found out. It does not actually make anything any safer, like I said. But the Dangerous Dog Act that was passed the last year by the county council does address any dog or any animal that's dangerous. And therefore, it's no longer needed to have a breed-specific ban on pit bulls, because the Dangerous Dog Act will deal with any owner or any animal that is considered vicious and dangerous. Last year, our organization, the Prince George's County Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, we had kind of ushered through the bill that the county council addressed last year for the Dangerous Dog Act. And part of that was the Dangerous Dog Act would make it not necessary to have the breed-specific ban. But Council Member Mel Franklin put an amendment on when the county council was set to vote on the measure last year. He brought up an amendment, and one of the things that happens with this pit bull ban is the pit bull ban is really an emotional issue, and that's one of the things that really adversely affects this whole situation. Like I said, the Dangerous Dog Act is more than enough to deal with any dangerous animal in Prince George's County. But there are people that have bad information over the years that believe that these dogs are inherently dangerous. And that's not the case at all. And that's the reason we've been struggling for actually since 2003 to try to have this bill repealed, because it's truly not necessary. And when we bring this up, Prince George's County is the only jurisdiction in the state of Maryland that still has a pit bull ban. And it adversely affects a lot of things, not only like $250,000 for the enforcement of the law, but we euthanize all sorts, any great number of dogs that pit bulls because they're here. And a lot of times these dogs are good dogs. They've come out of well-intentioned families, and the families are devastated that their animal is being put down because he didn't demonstrate any kind of vicious nature. He was just a pit bull, and that's really unfortunate that we do that. So that's some of the background in the history, and I wanted to Mr. Scott Cecil, I wanted to really congratulate you folks in Mount Rainier, because you really did something that was quite unique. And we used your amendment to, I called the 27 municipalities in Prince George's County, and we used your resolution as a model. And so far, we've had 3 of the city councils that have actually adopted it. Many others they have it on the agenda to discuss. And these are positive signs that when we have another attempt at having this repeal, hopefully it'll go through. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 with its long reach has really affected our effort to get this on the agenda of the county council again this year, because they're really focused on providing services for this pandemic. And this has been put on the back burner. But we absolutely hope that in the near future, we will have this law repealed, because it makes no sense anymore. Emily?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And I think, as you were indicating, I think important things to note there in the history include that in 2003, when that task force did their reporting on the effectiveness of the breed ban, not only did they find that it was costly and ineffective, but they recommended at that time, back in 2003, that the breed ban be repealed. And now, as you indicated, last year, the county went through the effort of updating their ordinance on animal control and including many enhanced measures on breed neutral dangerous dog laws and on irresponsible dog owner behaviors. And it makes it even the more unnecessary that they have this breed ban, because as had been noted even back in 2003, all aspects of protecting the public against dangerous dogs are already covered in other areas of the code. And I think that that is something that bears repeating again, that this is something that is not a public safety measure. It's arbitrary. And unfortunately, that effort in 2019 was unsuccessful. And ultimately, because of the amendment you mentioned that Mel Franklin introduced to put the breed ban back into the legislation, that passed by a vote of 7-4. So again, we do have a bit of an uphill battle in terms of getting the votes needed to pass a repeal, but that's why it's so important that we're doing this organizing now and having these conversations now.
Yeah, and let me say, that was one of the things that when they put that amendment, when Mel Franklin put the amendment, the people that we thought were going to vote positively, they indicated that they wanted to get more feedback from the community. And that's why we went out and contacted the 27 municipalities to see what their feelings were in dealing with this. And in my calls, I received nothing but positive responses from all of the jurisdictions. And like I said, it's an emotional issue. And if we can get past the emotions of a pit bull, we can move forward, because it truly is not necessary.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, thank you, Tony. And I think it's important to have that history and to understand kind of that side of it, and the stats and the figures when we're talking about the amount of waste that this ordinance has resulted in for taxpayers in Prince George's County. But there's also an important side of that, which is the real human and family impacts. And so I want to turn to Andy George now. I'd love for her to share with everybody her experience directly living with the Pitbull ban, because I think it's important to keep that also as a focus of the work that we're doing in this area. Andy.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm again Andy George, and I just wanted to share a little bit with you how this ban has affected me personally and my life, and the people in my life personally as well. My fiance and I, we had 2 Pitbull lab mixes, and we were well aware that they were Pitbull lab mixes. What we weren't aware was I didn't even know that there was an actual breed ban in Prince George's County. And so we've had them for a couple of years. They were really good. They were only like 2.5 years old. Never had any problems with them. They were never vicious. I'm a teacher, and I also babysit, and I do a lot of things when it comes to kids in my community. So there was always kids around them. They've never been any issue. And we also had a problem with strays in our community. And so our girls made friends, and they would jump the gate often when they saw their friends walking around. And this one particular day, they jumped the gate and I was home and looking for them. And they always go to the same spot. They usually go to, there's a park called Beaver Dam in my neighborhood, and they like to go run in a creek. And so this particular day, they weren't there, and I looked and I looked, and I came back home, and there was a notice on my front door that they had been taken by the Prince George's County Animal Shelter. And so the first thing I did was I called them because I wanted to know how I could get them back. And the first thing they told me was they were pit bulls and that they would be euthanized because they're illegal in the county. And that's it. And so I informed them that they were actually mixed. I didn't know that there was a ban, but they were mixed. And they told me that they would do a blood test, which I'm not really too sure that they did. And then, so at this point now I'm freaking out. I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do, how I'm gonna get them out, how they're not gonna get killed, because this is, some people can't have kids. I'm in my early 30s. I don't have kids, and those were my kids, and those were my fiance's kids. And so this was really alarming and concerning to me. And so I tried to do my research and figure out what I could do. And I saw somewhere online and through a few friends that I had that if you could find someone out of county to come pick them up and sponsor them, then they would release them to that person with my permission. And so when I called them back to ask about that, I don't remember the name of the guy, but a man answered the phone, and he told me if I wasn't there by a certain time that day, that they were going to be killed, and there was nothing that I can do about it. And that was it. And he was very blatant with it. He was very rude. He was very disrespectful. So at that point, I put on my shoes and I went up to the animal shelter, and I showed out. And that's how I got my attention that I needed. And that's how I was able to get my girls out. And when I saw them, they were in terrible condition. They had what they called kennel cough or something like that, which is not what they didn't have that going in there. They looked scared. Gypsy was like almost hyperventilating a little bit. Like I'd never seen a dog like, how like she was doing that, and it was just really, really concerning and alarming. And so I told them, this is what I'm doing. If I have to take any legal precautions, I would, or, if I have to take it to the public, I would do that too, as well. So at that point, they gave me a time frame to find somebody. And so I believe I had about 4 days, maybe. And I made a post about it on Facebook. And a wonderful young lady, her name is Marliana. She's a foster in Anne Arundel County, and she was able to sponsor, also fostered them until they were able to go to a new home where they are now, and they're very happy. But even in the 4 days that I went to go get them, like just their appearance, their like mannerisms, it was just a drastic change. It was very stressful. It was hurt, it broke my heart. It broke my fiance's heart. And I just the lack of empathy in those people, and just like how rude they were to me. And I feel like if I wasn't such a strong personality and I didn't stand so strong on standing up for myself and things that I love, they would have walked all over me.
Yeah, I'm sure I can tell like it's been a little while, but it still is something that you have a lot of like passion in your heart, a lot of emotion talking about it. And I can only imagine it's happy for you that and you have this connection that they're doing well, but I know that still it's your family that you don't get to be with anymore.
And I can't, that's another thing too. Like those are, again, I can't have kids. So these little babies that I raised, me and my fiance, I can't even see them anymore. So, and they can't see me, and I can't have any, I don't even want any dogs anymore. I don't have pets anymore. I wanted them, but
yeah,
I'm blessed that they are living a better life. Do I wish they were still with me? Of course. And do I think that a breed ban is ridiculous? Of course. So.
yeah.
And I just like to add to what Andy was saying, that this scenario comes up a lot. You know, this area has a lot of transiency. We have military personnel that comes into the area, like Andrews Air Force Base and Joint Base Andrews. And these people come in and they have pit bulls. And what ends up happening, they find out about the pit bull ban and they have to seek housing either in Charles County or in Virginia. There's a lot of negative feelers that go out into the community. Your story really, really quite sad, but it happens a lot.
Right. And even like you said,
Happening.
with the money being spent, that could go somewhere elsewhere. Again, I'm an educator for Prince George's County Public Schools at that. And a lot of things can be fixed within even just that program that money could, you know, certain money can go towards. So.
And the sad part about it, you know, your dogs were able to be saved, but a lot of good dogs are euthanized every year just because they're pit bulls. And that's something that really scares me.
Mr. Thompson, there was over 100 pit bulls back in this little tiny jail that they took me to go visit to see my girls. So they weren't the only ones, and they ranged from pup babies. So that's a baby. A baby can't be aggressive, to very older dogs.
Absolutely.
So that's when that's when I knew it was an issue. It was a real issue and it should be fixed.
Yeah. Well,
and that's my story. Thank you, everyone.
No, thank you, Andy. And I think it's a perfect segue because, you know, there's another way to enforce dangerous dog laws to keep the public safe, and to focus that again on actual dog behavior and owner behavior. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dan Duramo, as I mentioned, who's with the Humane Rescue Alliance and is our dog bite expert and talks all of things keeping people safe. So, Dan.
Thank you. So my name is Dan Duramo. I work for the Humane Rescue Alliance, Director of Field Services. So in addition to the dog bite situations, I also receive the cruelty situations, animal control, all of that. So in a lot of ways also ties into the pit bull issue. So in part talking about, you know, how we can achieve public safety without a breed ban, which is important. I'm also sort of in a unique position to also talk about how this transition could happen or what it would look like, because DC also went through a similar transition. Our now CEO, Lisa LaFontaine, came into her position in 2007. One of her really first orders of business was to undo the current pit bull ban protocols and legislation that we had in DC. And it was honestly a pretty quick turnaround. We saw within the first couple of months, we were able to start adopting out pit bulls that had gone through, or pit bull type dogs, whatever you want to call them. And these are dogs that went through all the same behavior evaluations that any other animal would go through, making sure that they're safe to go into the home that we're adopting them out to. And it, like I said, it didn't take much time at all to implement protocols that were already in place for every other breed of animal to make sure that those animals were safe to go into a home, and you know, no new protocols needed to be written. You just apply them to pit bull type dogs, and then all of a sudden you're adopting out happy, healthy pit bull type dogs to loving homes. So, you know, when we first turned that around, we had a live release rate at the shelter of around 20%. Pretty soon after that, our live release rate was up to 50%. And then now the Humane Rescue Alliance has a live release rate of 90%. And we are not achieving that by putting the community at risk or adopting out these aggressive animals that in turn are attacking the neighborhoods, and DC isn't this haven of vicious animals. We do it responsibly and carefully and thoughtfully. And, I think the fact that DC is not this haven of vicious animals where everyone is being attacked is proof alone that this can be done responsibly. So, obviously the unnecessary euthanasia of very adoptable, perfectly safe animals was a huge goal of turning around those policies. Granted, I wasn't around at that time. Though I was around shortly after, I can't imagine it was a surprise that there were a lot of additional benefits that came along when those policies were turned around. Starting, I guess, internally with the shelter became a nicer place. There aren't too many people that get into the animal protection field to euthanize a bunch of animals. And if you can imagine going to work at a shelter because you care for animals, just to then euthanize, as Andy said, these little Pitbull puppies that didn't do anything to anyone just because they look a certain way. That's terrible. And the toll that takes on staff, that is not a pleasant place to work. So when the culture of the shelter essentially switched to one of saving animals as opposed to euthanizing the animals that did nothing wrong other than a particular person on a particular day thought that they appeared as though they had just enough characteristics to look like a variety of breeds that someone identified as having this propensity of viciousness. It's, that's rough. And, that is reflected in I'm sure the way the shelter presents itself. People that are working in that world day after day, they don't love their job, I would guess. This is my personal assumption. And then I'm sure that's not them being put into a position to deal with people like Andy who are fighting to get their animal back. And then, they're in a position to tell her no, and that these animals have to be euthanized. It's a lose-lose all around for everyone. Another benefit to this turnaround of policy was with the position that the shelter held in the environment or in the community itself. The shelter was no longer seen as the enemy. They were no longer the people that you had to hide your animal from or avoid or not seek out any of the low-cost services that they provide, like free food or low-cost vaccinations or spaying and neutering or any of those things that the shelter is really there to help people with. People were hiding from them, hiding their animals from them, which turned into so many other issues with animals that had unplanned litters because they couldn't afford spay neuter. So now not only do you have this person with a vicious Pitbull type dog that they were probably doing very well with, caring for the one or two that they had. Well, as a cruel twist of fate, Pitbull type dogs have huge litters. So now this person that was doing okay with one or two now has 15. And for them to, because they were too scared to take, well, not scared, they justifiably did not seek out the resources that were available to them because otherwise their animal would be taken from them. So then now you have these litters that people either have trouble caring for, or it affects the entire family situation. You have people selling off these puppies just to get them somewhere other than the shelter where they're going to be euthanized. So sometimes they're going into not that great of homes. And it just snowballs into so many other problems. So, what really wasn't that hard of a switch, because again, it didn't change. It really just changed the approach to the situation. There wasn't really that change in resources or policy or protocols or behavior evaluations or anything. It's just approaching it differently, drastically changed the entire layout of the animal welfare picture in DC, period. And it was looking at animals as individuals versus, and that they have individual traits. Some are good, some are bad, need to be dealt with in certain ways, but treating that animal the way that animal needs to be treated, as opposed to, you know, assigning this trait to all animals that look a certain kind of way. And it's not that specific of a trait. So many animals get lumped into that, that may or may not even be predominantly of one of several breeds that they describe to be inherently dangerous. Interestingly, I used to live in upstate New York, and I adopted 2 dogs from a shelter up there. In New York, they were Pitbull mixes. Then over the years, as my life evolved, I moved to Baltimore with my 2 dogs, and then Columbia with my 2 dogs, and started to work at the Washington Humane Society, now HRA. And when I was looking to buy a house, I wanted to move to PG, and then I found out about the breed ban. And before I pursued that house hunting in that area, I went to the PG shelter and showed them my dogs, and I was like, "Do you think these are pit bulls?" And they said no. So my New York pit bulls magically transformed to mixed breeds by the time I got to PG County, and then I bought a house in PG County. That is definitely the positive spin to the arbitrary labeling of breeds just based on one person's opinion when you bring them into the shelter. But as Andy explained, it turns out far worse for so many other people. So as I mentioned before, you know, we made that switch, and it's important to note we didn't do it at the expense of DC residents' safety. And, you know, very similar to what PG recently adopted as far as their dangerous and vicious animal laws of investigating bite cases and all that. That's what we've been doing here in DC for years. And we investigate bites looking at the circumstances of the bite and the actions of that specific animal and the people also involved in that situation, and make a determination based on that situation how best to handle that animal in the interest of public safety, which might mean designating it as potentially dangerous, which comes with certain restrictions on how the person can keep their animal. Could be designated dangerous, which is even more restrictions on how that animal can be kept. Sometimes the animal has to be seized from them, but it is based entirely on what happened, not any preconceived assumption that the look of that animal made it any more dangerous than anyone else, any other animal. So, you know, I think it's important to emphasize that when talking to people about sort of where we see this going or what the goal is going forward, because Tony nailed it on the head. This is an emotional situation. It is based on fear, not facts. And a lot of ill-advised decisions can be made when you're making those decisions based on fear, not facts. And that's not to discount someone's fear. You know, fear is fear. You know, so it's important to not just show this handful of cute Pitbull type dogs sleeping with a baby in a cradle, because that's all well and good, but people want to know that they're going to be safe and that these dogs aren't going to be running down the street attacking people, because it's happened before, right? There's many stories out there that people are going to pull from and say, like, look what happened to this child, or look what happened to this family. We need to protect them from that. It's important to respond to that with logic of what are the steps that can be taken to actually protect them, by first evaluating sort of where the system failed that got them in that position in the first place. And it wasn't because a dog with muscles and a square jaw showed up in the neighborhood. It's because, you know, the neighborhood is lacking chaining laws, or is lacking enforcement of running at large laws, or is lacking enforcement of bite cases where this is repeated occurrences, or just is lacking the enforcement agency's ability to enforce good laws that are on the books, because laws don't matter if the officers who are charged with enforcing it don't have the power to enforce it. So, you know, there have been very few dog bites of people walking down the sidewalk, you know, when the dog is contained appropriately on the person's property. So if you focus more on that versus arbitrarily designating animals that look a certain way dangerous, because take a trip around PG, it's not working. There's lots of Pitbull type dogs in PG. You know, if we focus more on the enforcement of responsible animal care and, you know, helping owners do what they need to do to take appropriate measures to keep their animals secure, training, spaying and neutering, all of that stuff, you will see drastic drops in bite cases because people are taking care of their animals better.
Yeah.
And it looks
Yeah.
like I need to turn the light on in my.
I was going to
the sun is
say,
setting.
you've fell down a hole gradually during
Yeah.
that conversation, unfortunately.
I'll be right
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, that's fine. But thank you, Dan. That was really informative. And so I think that leads us directly to kind of what can we do now? Where do we go from here? And I think one really creative solution to some action that can move this issue forward in Prince George's County is what recently was done in Mount Rainier, thanks to the work of Councilmember Scott Cecil. And so I would love to turn it over to him to talk a little bit about what inspired him to introduce this deprioritization ordinance, what exactly that means, and kind of what that could be for folks to do in their own municipalities. So, Councilmember Cecil.
Great. Thanks, Emily. And thank you so much for inviting me to be here and for helping me get prepared for it. And thank you so much to the other panelists. And what a great turnout as well. I'm so thrilled to see this many people here watching this. It's very, very well attended, which is very exciting. And I know those of you who are tuning in, we don't really need to convince you how terrible of a policy this is. So I'm going to sort of refrain from going into a lot of that, since the other panelists have done a more than adequate job of covering all of that. And I'll focus really intensely on what I actually did as a city council person to sort of get around this county law in effect. So again, I'm Scott Cecil. I'm a city council member in Mount Rainier. I was elected in 2019 for a 4-year term. And I believe the attendees can see the chat. And if you can, you'll see that I put some contact information there. If you'd like to email me or contact me via social media, you can do that there. And if you follow the link, you'll be able to find my city council email address if you prefer to contact me there. For anyone who doesn't know, Mount Rainier is a small city in an arts district just outside of DC. We're actually right on the DC-Maryland border there in Prince George's County. We're less than a square mile and have a population of about 9,000 people. So really a small city. And I've found now as a council member for about 1.5 years that the small geography and low population presents a lot of challenges, but also unique opportunities insofar as formulating and passing what might be seen as unobtainable or even controversial legislation or policy in another area, just by virtue of the fact that there are very few people that are going to show up to say no to something. So when I moved to Prince George's County about 3 years ago and discovered there was a breed-specific prohibition at the county level, I became interested in enacting the lowest law enforcement priority to mitigate that policy of prohibition. And this is key by codifying the behavior that was already happening within the local police department. And this was really the key to passage, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I think I should first explain what a lowest law enforcement priority means. So this is a form of decriminalization, which deprioritizes the enforcement of crimes with no victim, which are and/or crimes that are largely universally unenforceable, like crimes based on prohibition of behavior, activity, or ownership. A lowest law enforcement priority is also designed to give law enforcement officers discretion not to arrest or cite people for crimes where there is no victim, and again, or crimes that are largely universally unenforceable, such as crimes based on prohibition of behavior, activity, or ownership. A few examples of what, you may hear me say LLEP, that's so I can avoid the mouthful of lowest law enforcement priority over and over again. But some examples of LLEPs are most often applied to drug possession, sex work, trespassing, gambling, or even traffic citations that don't pose a danger to public safety. The reason I note this is because when I first heard about lowest law enforcement priority is about 20 years ago, because they were being used for cannabis policy reform. So what was happening were municipalities, whether they be cities and towns or counties, that understood that marijuana, for people who don't know what cannabis is, but that marijuana prohibition was not a successful policy, but their state government, and of course the federal government, still prohibited that substance. They would pass a lowest law enforcement priority at the municipal level, saying, okay, it's all well and good that the state of Maryland or wherever prohibits cannabis possession, but our police department is going to make enforcement of that prohibition their lowest priority. And so it's sort of a workaround to getting past a prohibition that's at a higher level of government. So the key here is what the legislative strategy was. So I used the concept of an LLEP on the American Pitbull Terrier ban to advance two concepts. One, the giving discretion to law enforcement agents. And this was important so that my counterparts on the city council would feel some political cover if they were catching heat from residents about why are our police enforcing the laws that are on the book. And then the second concept here that's important to remember is what I mentioned at the beginning, that this was codifying what the police department was already doing. So whether residents of the city think the ban is good policy or not, or even whether the individual police officers themselves think it's a good policy, what was happening in reality is that they were effectively ignoring the ban. And of course, I knew this personally because I have a housemate that owns a Pitbull mix. So I was living with a Pitbull. Everyone knew I had one, including the police chief, who I talked to almost every day, and nothing was happening. So it was sort of forcing an acknowledgement that the policy, not only the argument over whether it was a good or bad policy, although we'll win that argument 99 times out of 100 if you go on the facts, that ultimately didn't matter, because what mattered was what was actually happening on the ground. So really, to hammer this point home, we tend to think of legislation as we're going to craft and form legislation and then pass that, and then we're going to see what happens and use that to inform whether or not we want to adjust that policy or how to write policy and legislation moving forward. And that's great, but it works both directions. It's a two-way street. The reality on the ground should also inform what is or is not good policy. And really being able to center the conversation around those two pieces, law enforcement discretion and the reality of what our police department was already doing, those were when we were having the discussion on that battlefield, whether or not this was a good policy wasn't even part of the discussion. And again, I would welcome that discussion because I think I would win. But this issue is polarized. And as I'm seeing some of the questions in Q&A, you'll hear people, including highly educated and other public officials, that will come to these types of conversations, and all of their facts will be wrong. Because if you do a Google search, you're going to find information one way or the other. Okay, so just to close this out here, so we can get to that Q&A, what steps did I take in order to pass this? And by the way, if you would like to see a template or a draft of the legislation or even the final product, feel free to email me. It sounds like you can also contact Tony, because I know he's been doing the work that I hoped to get to at some point and shopping that around to the other municipalities in the county. So Tony, shout out back to you for doing that work, because it's something that I've been wanting to do since we passed it. And then once the pandemic came, it just completely fell off my radar. So I actually found out quite by accident that somebody was already doing that work when I started seeing other municipalities pass these.
Yeah.
Okay, real quickly, I'm gonna sort of rush through this last part so we can get to the Q&A. But I just wanted to let y'all know how I laid the groundwork for completing this project. So this consisted first of listening to the position of residents of the city, in particular, those that I disagreed with on the issue, because this prepared me to be able to identify, anticipate, and refute the strongest arguments I encountered. So after having maybe 100 conversations, it turns out there are only 4 ways that people will endorse this law. They think that pit bulls are dangerous or more dangerous than other dogs. They think that pit bulls bite harder and stronger than other dogs, which is also not true. Or they believe that American pit bull terriers will bite you and they'll never let go. The only other argument that I encountered in favor of the policy would simply be stories from someone saying that they saw an attack, or they knew someone who was attacked by a dog, or they themselves owned a dog that bit someone. But again, whether or not those dogs were actually pit bulls was sometimes not even known by the owner, the person telling the story. And so again, I know everyone who's tuning into this already understands this, but when looking at this objectively as a policymaker, the most absurd thing to me on its face was, what are we basing this on? It's based on the subjective appearance of the animal for whatever enforcement agent is interacting with the pet owner, right? And the last thing was just to revisit the legislative strategy here. I realized that the controversial nature of some lowest law enforcement priority legislative work. And so I wanted to make passage of this legislation it was a heavy lift under the current political environment, being able to come out against the county's ban. So this is precisely where lowest law enforcement priority legislation comes in, because you don't have to deal head on with those antithetical political winds that are blowing in the other direction. One final thing that I'll say is the good news for anyone out there who is also a policymaker or wants to share this with your local elected officials and encourage them to pursue a similar type of policy. The great news is that lowest law enforcement priority legislation as a tool is being used all over the United States right now in numbers like we've never seen before, both in terms of ballot initiatives and legislative action like what we did on our city council. So whether you're talking about Denver, Oakland, San Francisco, or even Washington, D.C. in the election just 2 weeks ago today, voters in D.C. with 75% of the vote passed a lowest law enforcement priority against criminalizing psilocybin mushrooms and other psychedelic plant-based medicines. So I really think that lowest law enforcement priorities, this is actually the front lines of harm reduction when it comes to policy in the US. And we're going to be seeing these around drug policy and sex work until the prohibition on those things is lifted. So I think a similar strategy with this breed specific legislation in Prince George's County, really pursuing the LLEP path and getting as many municipalities in the county to pass that sort of legislation, I think is the key to finally getting the county council to do the right thing and overturning the ban. So I hope all of that was helpful, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. And thanks again for inviting me to be here, Emily, and thanks to HRA as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I too want to be able to get to the question. So I just really, really briefly am going to share some information from just to tie things up here for everybody. Where do we go from here? Again, ask your city council to take a stance with the deprioritization resolutions. Mount Rainier and Morningside are the two jurisdictions that have already passed this. And again, Morningside is thanks to the work of Tony's outreach, and the Prince George's SPCA has reached out to some other municipalities and gotten some foots in the door there. So hearing from their own city residents will surely have an impact there. And then if you're going to reach out to council members on the county council, this website here is where you find out who your county council member is. It's good to try to find a time to actually have a conversation. So much gets lost in the hustle of just the noise of another email, another letter. We've really gotten the feedback from the council that they want to hear from county residents. They want this to be something that is obvious to them, that there's a groundswell of support from the county to make this change. Doing the deprioritization resolutions is one way to certainly show the consensus in the county for making this change. But again, we've heard the message loud and clear that this has to be coming from the folks in Prince George's County. And again, making the personal connection to why you care about this, but also some big picture items. I saw a question in the chat about Denver, and I think it's important just to mention it in the context of this being the trend is moving away from breed-specific legislation. Over 100 municipalities now have enacted some form or have repealed their breed-specific legislation in the past few years, and now 22 states have enacted some form of restrictions on what local municipalities can do in terms of enacting this legislation. So the trend is very much in favor of going away from this. So with that, I will just I'll lead it to the chat or to the Q&A so that we have time for that. I just wanted to say, please feel free to reach out if you want more updates about this. This is the website. I'll leave that up there for you all to be able to email if you have any additional questions. But I think let's get into some of the Q&A. Okay, so.
How are we going to do this?
Yes. So one of the questions here is, at the latest Prince George's Council meeting, when the ban was reinstated, a few members of the council referred to the bogus data from dogsbite.org. Do any of the panelists have recommendations for rebutting this source, as it keeps coming up over and over? Dan, do you have a little bit of information that you can share about?
Yeah. I think it is, you know, what I touched on before and Tony initially talked about was how emotionally charged this topic is, and everyone has their personal stories, or their friend had a pit bull that was taken, or their friend was attacked by a pit bull. You know, there's a lot of quote unquote facts being thrown around, and yeah, a lot of them are pretty bogus. Dogsbite.org is one of those sites that has an agenda.
Yes,
and yes, and you know, I would, you know, if you really, it's not that hard to find out, but if you look into the history of dogsbite.org and the person who started it and their motivation for starting it, and you know, it's not hard to see the bias that is there. But I would caution people to be mindful of at least that perceived bias can go both ways. So in my opinion, it is not as helpful to come across as that pit bulls are cute, lovable, they all are perfect, and you know, every dog is perfect out there. My approach is more present that unbiased, logical approach that is both equally balanced to protecting the animal as well as keeping people safe. And I think sort of one of the best counter arguments to that argument is to provide unbiased information, or at least information that would be hard to argue is biased. So as much as HRA is uh, an authority on the subject, it would be easy for someone that is anti-Pitbull to claim HRA is biased because obviously we're the animal lover, animal welfare organization. You know, we're going to skew the information in our favor. I would argue that instead of talking about the ASPCA, HRA, places like that, which could easily be seen as biased, regardless of what we say, it would be better to highlight organizations like the CDC, the AVMA, CDC, Center for Disease Control, AVMA Association, Veterinary Medical, the American Veterinary Medical Association, the American Bar Association, the National Animal Control Association. You know, you would be hard pressed to make the argument that these are pro Pitbull dog organizations, but they are using sound public safety logic to all say, which they have all come out to say, that breed-specific legislation doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. Department of Justice, if you have a service animal that is a pit bull type dog, a business is not allowed to deny you access if your service animal is a pit bull type dog. So because they recognize that that person walking into the store with their pit bull type dog is not all of a sudden putting that entire store at risk because of the way that dog looks walking around the grocery store. They say, like, you have to demonstrate that that specific animal is a safety risk to the people, and therefore you can't bring it in there, which I agree. All of the animals that are dangerous to the public, regardless of what they look like, should not be in the public. But it's because of their behavior, not their look. So yeah. I would say counter those arguments with the plethora of unbiased, national, well-respected, non-animal organizations, leaders in their field who also support that breed-specific legislation doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Right. And I think it's important to put into perspective that the information that's shared by groups like Dogsbite are based on, you know, media reports that are biased. And so when it comes to the actual peer-reviewed data, all of that points to the fact that breed is not a risk factor that's associated with dog bites or severity of dog bites, and that all of those factors have to do with human actions, essentially. And so we will send a follow-up email to everyone who registered and attended this event, and we'll include some talking points and some things that you can use for having these conversations. I see that there is a question in the Q&A as well about combating questions about, you know, bite force and things like that we do unfortunately see is just a myth that holds on and just continues to stick around despite all of the data that points to that not being any kind of real difference between a pit bull's, you know, bite force and any other dog of its size. So we can send some of that as follow-up information to everyone along with the template deprioritization resolution as well. I was going to ask another question, Tony, but did you have something else you were?
I just wanted to say just quickly, when I was a youngster, which has been a while, the dangerous dog at that time was a Doberman Pinscher, you know, and everyone was afraid of the Doberman Pinscher. Yeah. These things become emotional. They're not based on any science. And that's what you were talking about. The science doesn't say that a pit bull is any more dangerous than any other dog. And why the Dangerous Dog Act is all we really truly need to address any kind of viciousness in the community.
Yes.
Yes. I think it has everything to do with how the dog is trained and who is teaching the dog what, much like, you know, and it's all learned behaviors. So.
Yes. Well, I think it is 5:30, so I'll just have our last question here. I see that someone has asked, is the Pitbull ban reinforcing and fueling racial discrimination? And I wonder if Councilmember Cecil, I think you might have a perspective on this. I just wonder if you'd like to share your thoughts on that.
The shortest answer is yes. And Tony actually definitely knows the history better than I. I've only lived in the area for about 6 or 7 years. But as a person of color, actually, ironically, our mayor, who I love her to death, she's an amazing woman and is a Black woman and has been our mayor and has been on the council for over 30 years. She was actually the only person to vote against this because even among the African-American community, among the older age group, they actually tended to support this in Mount Rainier, which I thought was interesting. But yes, 100%. There is a lot of conscious and unconscious bias that's related to these types of prohibitions, and it's also targeting Black folks in a way that is not only racist because of the policy outcomes, but the stereotypes that inform why you would do this type of prohibition is also racist, because it's stereotyping Black people as folks who engage in dogfighting, which I'm sure the science would tell us that there's no racial correlation to people that engage in animal cruelty or any other type of mistreatment of animals, including dogfighting. So easiest answer, yeah, 100%. This is a racist policy. We should just say it like that. Let's not equivocate. It's racist. And that's one of the main reasons why we should get rid of it, particularly in a county that has a majority Black population and is a very progressive county. Over 90%, over 95% of Prince George's County voted against Donald Trump, for example. So we're a very leftist county, and this is the antithesis of progressive policy, and we should throw it away.
Yeah.
It's a relic of a more racist time in the county's history.
But I will let you know that Mel Franklin, who brought that up, was a Black man, and it is an issue. It's an emotional issue, as I keep bringing it up, because some people are locked in with the idea that this is by nature a very dangerous dog. And like I said, I remembered that as a teenager or as a kid, we were afraid of Doberman pinschers because they were supposed to be tearing your arm off and everything. And it was nothing like that. But anyhow.
This is very quick response. Thank you. And this is the insidiousness of systemic racism, right?
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't require individual conscious racist intent. Most of the Congressional Black Caucus supported the 1994 crime bill too. And that's because we're talking about systemic racism, not the individual conscious intent of the legislators. That's what systemic racism means. And that's part of what gives rise to things like this ban.
Very good. Very good.
Well, I want to thank you all again. I want to be respectful of the time. I appreciate all the participants who stuck with us a little bit late. I really appreciate everyone participating and all the engaging questions. We didn't get to so many other great questions, so please feel free to, again, email that advocacy@humanerescuealliance.org if you want to stay in touch. If you have any other questions, we'll follow up with everybody, get you some talking points, get you some templates. And again, this is the first of many actions on this. We are dedicated to seeing this take place and to push this in 2021. I can't thank our panelists enough for your time. And I hope that everyone has a great rest of your evening. So thank you again. And